Yeah, no, I think Hal is feeling the pressure, and I think the Yankees need it more. Steve Cohen has definitely proved that he can flex it. He's done it.
Here we go. We're back on FT talking about the New York Mets. Deesha Thosar joining us to break it all down. And of course, they are very much in the news with what's going on with Juan Soto. She's a Fox Sports MLB reporter and columnist. Deesha, great to have you on. How has your Juan Soto sweepstakes tracking been going?
Pretty slow going, right, so far. And of course, thanks for having me on. I think it kind of revved up a little this week talking to Hal Steinbrenner at the owners' meetings. A little unexpected. I think the Yankees always do a good job of making Hal available at these events. But I was surprised that he was so willing to kind of hold a scrum with maybe a dozen or maybe less reporters, especially right after their meeting with Soto in California. So I think the position he took to even talk about it is a little telling, in that Steve Cohen, who was also at the meetings, did not talk about it. He did speak to reporters off the record for a few minutes before he went upstairs to kind of conduct the meetings, but he stayed out of it. And I think that's kind of right, a choice that he made. He feels maybe that he's in a strong position, that he doesn't need to make matters worse or better. Whereas, even going off of Hal Steinbrenner's comments when he did talk about Soto, it was, well, I don't know how confident we are. Sure, we're in the mix. I have no idea. It was like a little anxious, a little, how are you actually going to sign this guy? And really, there was no news, right, that came out of it one way or the other about how close they are. So I think even just the choice to kind of let out his thoughts and feelings on how that meeting went is a departure, right, from how the Mets and Steve Cohen decided to handle it, which was to kind of stay silent and let their kind of financial flexibility that everyone's afraid of do most of the talking.
Who needs this more? I mean, we're going to put it right out there. Who needs this more? Steve Cohen's Steve Cohen's ability to flex his financial muscle, and if he doesn't get Juan Soto, well, maybe he doesn't really flex his. Or is Hal saying, we've been flexing our muscle for decades?
Yeah, no, I think Hal is feeling the pressure, and I think the Yankees need it more. Steve Cohen has definitely proved that he can flex it. He's done it. He got Verlander, he got Scherzer, he signed Lindor. I mean, there's been no shortage of Steve Cohen making his presence known since he owned the club a few years ago now. And I think Hal Steinbrenner understands that he needs to get this done. He had an interesting comment about, listen, I have ears. I know what's expected of me. And I think that's not something we would have heard from him maybe early on when he first took over from his dad, George Steinbrenner, to really being the chairman of this team. I think he's putting his foot down on a free agent outside of someone like Judge. The last time we saw Hal being this upfront about a deal, at least that he needed to get done, was Judge's free agency. They find now we know, of course, they had a talk at the end that got the deal done. I think Hal coming in front of reporters, in front of cameras, saying he means it. He's going to go as far as he thinks he can take the Soto sweepstakes, even going as so far as say we have the ability to sign anyone. I think is really telling of just how important Hal Steinbrenner knows that he has to not only reach this deal to get Soto back. I think the other side of that, this reality where maybe they don't get it done and Soto goes to the Mets, is, I think, for the Yankees, it should be incomprehensible. I don't know really how they can come back from something like that at this point.
I want to play devil's advocate, Deesha. Let me ask you this. Let's say Juan Soto does sign with the Mets, and we've seen what the Dodgers have done on the West Coast, and we know the drive that Steve Cohen has for his organization to be great. Is there a world where if they get Soto, he's going to do whatever he can to maybe keep Pete Alonso or go get as many pieces as he can to compete with teams like the Dodgers moving forward? Where is he on that, and where is he on Pete Alonso?
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm of the camp, right? There's two camps here where if the Mets sign Soto, oh, no way they're getting Pete Alonso. I think no, they can definitely afford to do both. They're getting 150 million or so off the books this year. But even more than that, Steve Cohen has showed he's not afraid of the luxury tax. He's fine with surpassing it. He can kind of handle that burden. Draft picks is another issue now. Like, I think David Stearns kind of owning that front office will maybe talk some more money sense into decisions like that. But I think the Mets absolutely, after if they do get Soto, should then pivot to keeping Pete Alonso, not just for what it would mean for the team. But also, Pete is right now being a little overlooked in these Juan Soto sweepstakes, right? He is one of those faces of the franchise alongside Francisco Lindor. He's really warmed himself up to the fan base, especially after that postseason run. They only even got so far as the NLCS because of what he did in Milwaukee with that huge home run in the ninth inning. So that changed, I think, the game, not just for Pete, the fan base, the Mets, all of the factors he needed on his side in a regular season. That was actually his down year. I think turned around in that postseason to now there is a reality where they can keep both Soto and Pete, keep adding on. And I think that was telling too with Hal Steinbrenner when he mentioned that Soto is asking teams, what's your pipeline? What's your player development process? So Soto wants it all. He's not, of course, just here to win a World Series. We know that. But if he's going to sign a long-term deal in the 8, 9, 10-year range, 11, he wants to make sure the pipeline is also right up to speed that they can keep winning, whichever team he actually ends up with.
So what I'm hearing you say right now is let's not get too caught up in this Mark Vientos hype, and let's really value what we have at first base. That's what I'm hearing you say, right?
100%. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Mark Vientos is great. He can stay at third.
I'm just glad somebody else is feeling me right now, because I just think what Pete has done, I just don't think Mark Vientos can replicate that. I don't. I think he's a great young player, but I think Pete brings a lot of value, and especially you talk about guys being able to play in New York.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mark Vientos, I think, wouldn't be looked at as sort of this Pete Alonso replacement. I think he can be looked at as, sure, they can pivot to Vientos at first base. But just like you said, all the things that Pete represents to the Mets, that's really, really hard to just copy and paste. Mark Vientos right now is definitely showing the Mets and the franchise, the fan base, who he is, what he can do. But we need to see more of it, right? Before you can kind of hang your hat on the Vientos train and go that route. I think he has to replicate a season like he did this year over and over again, which is what Pete Alonso did starting with his rookie year. He really put himself on the map and then has been an above average player from that point on. Even this year, when it was a down year, he was still better than league average. So in that way, yeah, I think the Vientos is not so much a polar bear replacement as, oh yeah, we can put him at first, he'll be productive for us, but now who are we going to get to replace Vientos at third because of his big season and his strong season?
Deesha, one of the things we do is we represent and we talk about what's actually going on the screen. And is that a real fiddly fig that you have in the background? Because
it sure
we have
is.
plants. Yeah. That's impressive. That is
this is my real background.
Fig.
Yeah, she's been through a lot, actually. Her name is Figgy. But we finally found a good growth spurt this past summer, and she's been thriving ever since. I'm glad you noticed.
That is a large plant. We like our plants here at FT. But everybody needs to listen to what Deesha's saying, because you're Deesha Damas, writing the article that you wrote about Tarik Skubal. So if you're saying this about Vientos, people need to perk up and listen. Tell us about the article that you reposted conveniently right when Tarik Skubal won the American League Cy Young. But tell us about this great article that you wrote.
Yeah, it's funny. I was looking at Detroit last offseason. I was like, this is going to be a big year for some of these guys, not just Skubal, guys like Kerry Carpenter. And of course, he ended up having a big year. But something about Skubal was, wait a second. It was one of those things where we might know on the inside he has potential, this journey he has, all of this matters about how hard it was for him to get to this point. But the world doesn't know. And what caught my attention was that people don't even know how to say his name. I was actually having a debate with reporters who've covered him about, wait, is it Tarik? Is it Tarik? What is it? How do you say it? It was actually the first question I asked him in April, kind of leading into this feature of how he's prepared to lead the Tigers. Like, how do you actually pronounce your name? Like, put it on the record. And it is actually Tarik, like Derek with a T. And I think it really can be like just going from a microcosm to macro in that way of like, who is this guy? And over the course of a season, right, we saw him show us over and over again. In that first interview I had with him in April, there was this edge to him of, I'm not going to just settle for how we've been viewed. I want the Tigers to be dominant. I want to take them there. And that, you don't hear that every day, not even from guys who might not be in the national spotlight, but even leaders of teams, faces of MLB, don't really go there anymore, especially in these days where most players are just kind of saying what they want on social media, not as much with reporters being themselves. So that stood out to me in that, wow, this guy doesn't just have the stuff, which of course he did because of his journey of how hard it was for him to get to that point through injuries and setbacks and making himself known, but also that attitude of chip on your shoulder. This is who we really are. And I think I kind of knew back in April he's going to have some sort of impact. I did think he was my pick, even with a Fox Sports. We had team picks before the season started of who's going to be the Cy Young. So I picked him for that too. I don't know if that means anything with Pete Alonso, Mark Vientos, and that whole future, like you said, but it did work out this year with Skubal, who just had such a great season. I think he really showed everyone what he's about, and I think that's great for the sport.
It's so easy to spend all of Steve Cohen's money, so let's just keep spending it. Let's keep spending. What does this rotation need to look like? What are they bringing back that they're excited about, and what do they have to go out and do? Because you've already spent on Pete Alonso and Juan Soto. We know Uncle Steve has got a lot of cash, but you still need 5 guys to start.
Yeah, exactly. What I love about, I think, this offseason with the Steve Cohen and his billions and his big wallet like looming over the whole industry is that this time he has another weapon with David Stearns leading a full offseason. Last year they went and got him, and he was Steve Cohen's big white whale for a few years. And now he's finally starting off the offseason fresh with a David Stearns making some of the best decisions as an executive that this sport has seen in terms of trades and signings and how to get creative, like Stearns did in Milwaukee. Now Stearns is operating with those billions. So I'm very interested in how far they take this, because guys like Corbin Burns, right? The Mets should absolutely be in the conversation for the top starter on the market. They need to build a whole rotation. So start there. And then after that, who makes sense? Max Fried, Blake Snell, all these free agents that are demanding a lot, but I think Stearns can kind of bring some of these executives and agents down to earth, and just with his reasoning, where I think in the past the Mets were in flux there. They didn't have a true front office leader. I think they could have been taken advantage of much more easily. And now it's okay, we have to make kind of these smart offers or it's not going anywhere, even though at the end of the day it might be that Steve Cohen does top any other offer that any other team has for some free agents. So I think they have to be in the mix for definitely the top guys in the market, those guys I mentioned. Out of those, I do think Burns and Stearns connection with Milwaukee at least leads to some familiarity that can give the Mets an edge there. But I like Max Fried as someone who kind of is being, maybe there's some ice on his free agency this year just because of the other stars ahead of him. But he already had Tommy John surgery. He's kind of battled through some things. He had a little injury that he had to overcome with the Braves. And now I think he's in a good position that he's been super consistent. And there's not that many left-handers who are kind of have that market as aces on in free agency right now. And I think the Mets should absolutely be going for someone like Fried and maybe Burns to kind of set the tone with their rotation this offseason.
Does Yoenis Cespedes, the news that he'd like to come back to the Mets, does he know that the Wilpons don't own the team anymore? Because pretty much his last stint here, it was just like Yoenis Cespedes would go to Wilpon and be like, hey, can I get my new contract? And he'd be like, sure, come over to the house and hang out. So does Yoenis know that?
Yeah, it's funny because he just threw out one of these first pitches in the NLCS, and it was like, wait, I still have questions about why you left the team and when in 2020, because I was there as a beat reporter for New York Daily News in that crazy pandemic season. One day Cespedes is there, the next he's not, and we hear Brody Van Wagenen, who's the GM at the time, kind of ripping him through reporters for his decision to leave. It was like this really heated departure. It was not, no one was happy on either side. And now suddenly he's throwing out the first pitch. The Mets are in the NLCS, and unfortunately Cespedes did not take questions that day, but it would have been something like, where were you in August 2020 and how are you back here now? So I think he definitely is well aware. Of course, the Wilpons are no longer in charge, and the fact that he said on in Insta, it was like, if I play anywhere, it's going to be just for the Mets. I think that's great for the Mets. He looked like a tank when he was throwing out that first pitch. Definitely looked like a player they could have used in the playoffs. But he hasn't seen major league pitching. If we're going to be realistic about this, he hasn't played in a long time. He did hold a workout for teams to come see him in 2021, and then there was some activity in a Dominican league, but the Mets should absolutely maybe just see how this goes. They could use him at DH. There is an opening there. Cespedes is 39 years old and needs to hit a fastball at 100 miles per hour in 2025. So let's see if he can do that first, I think.
And guess what? I mean, that wasn't the only time that the Mets didn't know where Yoenis Cespedes was. They didn't know where he was half the time, and I'm not just making that up. I know from people directly with the team back then that he would get hurt, and they literally did not know where he was. I'd be like, how's the rehab going? They're like, we don't even know where he is right now. Like, let alone how the recovery's going, where he's at in the rehab process. They go, we cannot locate him. Not answering us. Don't really know how to handle this situation. So
probably riding horses and smoking sticks somewhere.
Exactly. I would, taking half the season off. So I would say his chances of signing with any major league ball club, based on disappearing multiple times, probably teeny tiny. And yes, he is 39. So, but it is entertaining to see him pop up there and maybe say, "Oh, I want to make it right. I want to show up for work every day." But it's a little too late. Deesha, this was fun. Thank you so much for stopping by. Appreciate the time. Enjoy the weekend.
Of course. Thanks, guys, for having me on.
Be sure to like and subscribe for more content. We're back here every weekday, all year long, so do not miss an episode.
The videos are coming in all day. Here's another video you might enjoy.
Baseball the way it should be covered.